The Farm Service Agency looks forward and wants to work with all of the partners here in the room, and as we move forward through the summer, we'll certainly do that. So thank you for having us here today.
Thank you for being here. Bob?
Oh boy, another opportunity. I'll just simply say there's some challenging decisions coming up for the corn crop relative to side dressing nitrogen, to getting on with some herbicides to kill weeds, and possibly to control diseases. And the good news is we've got those three individuals here in the room that you can hit with those detailed questions. So Jim Camerato and Kirsten Wise and what's his name? Oh, Bill Johnson, who are here in that regard. So, you know, those three areas in particular, there could be some really challenging questions or decisions to be made, especially if it continues to rain and continues to keep us out of the fields. And so, if you want to interview folks with that, you know, just be sure and catch those people before you leave. So.
All right, Ken?
We've been talking a lot about the precipitation and the excess precipitation, and probably haven't hit the temperature quite as much, especially in the forecast, and I've been asked about that. As we showed on my slide, that last slide, looking for below normal temperatures coming up here in July and possibly even the rest of summer. And the thing we got to think about is, okay, below normal temperatures means that we're having fewer growing degree days accumulate through the rest of the season, if that does come about. And how is this going to impact maturity of the crop? Will we have enough time to finish these crops, especially the crops that are behind or not really doing all that well right now? And I'm not an agronomist, and I guess I'll open up that question to some of the agronomists who probably has a better feel for that. But we probably need to think a little bit too about what's the temperature effects going to be, as well as what is the upcoming rainfall impacts.
Bob, do you have a comment on that?
Well, maybe two aspects to that. If we continue getting rain, that means we're continuing to get cloudy days also. And from the corn crop's perspective, and I think it's true for both crops, you know, not only do we need these excessive rains to stop for the next several weeks, we need some bright sunny days with decent temperatures, and we have also not had those in the past 2 or 3 weeks. So without that brilliant sunshine and adequate temperatures to really get these photosynthetic factories, as it were, up and running, that will also slow down their recovery potential. So cool weather will not help that process. Cloudy weather will not help that process, and that's even, you know, above and beyond any possible delay in maturity because of a cooler season. But you know, most of the corn, as Sean indicated, both crops, even though we got off to a late start, both crops got to the halfway point, at least in a normal time frame of planting, and finished almost ahead of schedule in terms of planting. So from a planting date perspective, they're not behind necessarily. Their development, because it's been cool for the past several weeks, you know, in between some of these bouts of warm weather, but these crops are already a little behind on their development, even though they were planted somewhat normal dates. And indeed, if it would continue to be cooler than normal for the next 30 days, that would certainly delay. I'm not sure it would necessarily put us at risk of a killing fall freeze, unless you're going to tell us we're also going to get an early killing fall freeze. And he won't tell us that. But certainly with regard to corn and any possible replanting of corn at this point, which is already risky because of where we are in the growing season, it would be an absolute kiss of death if they replanted and then it also turned off to be cooler than normal, because that would really put those crops at risk of not maturing before killing fall freeze.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Well, I think one of the things we're telling producers is don't give up on this crop. Again, you have to make the best decisions. For some, prevented planting may be the best decision they can make, but we never know what the next week, the next month is going to hold, and we're hopeful that we will get better weather. In the long run, sometimes we do get some compensations. One of those that we tend to get are prices, higher prices. Indiana is a major corn and soybean state, so when we have trouble here, especially coupled with similar troubles in Illinois, Missouri, and Ohio, at this point, we are getting a price reaction. We have seen corn up about 35 cents a bushel, soybeans around 80 cents a bushel. So certainly the market has taken note, and those are in the 5 to 10% higher prices. So what that suggests is that if one is about average as a producer in Indiana and loses 5% of their crop, actually prices help to compensate for that. Now again, we still don't know that for sure, but you know, that is one of the things I think we continue to hold on. We don't know how this all will work out until the very end.
Okay, Sean?
One thing to add to this idea of planting and planting late on soybeans, and if it pushes back, we do get a fall freeze that hits it. I still think there's benefit in this instead of just leaving the ground completely fallow. And so thinking about the ideas of weed management and keeping their weeds down to helping the soil get some aggregation to it with the root systems that are growing through there, as well as a little bit of nitrogen credit. So on the worst case scenario, whenever the beans are getting planted later and they don't make it, there is still benefit to that ground, and especially as you think about what's going to come to the next year. If you don't have that, there's some potential issues that could come in the following growing season.
Okay. Michael?
A couple things. First of all, I forgot to mention there is some good publications on crop insurance on the Center for Commercial Agriculture website. In particular, there's a pretty good piece on delayed and late planting from Iowa State University. And we don't have one from Purdue right now, and so that's a really good piece that kind of walks through some of these options on delayed and late planting. I wanted to follow up a little bit on what Sean was saying in terms of replanting in particular. I think if you're looking at some either no stands because it was flooded out or some really poor stands, I think replanting soybeans is a very viable option for a lot of producers. I think there's going to be more additional revenue there than there will be cost in that particular situation. I think if you have a half a stand or three-quarter stand, I think that's a different situation, Sean. There you have a lot tougher decision on whether you want to go ahead and disc up or replant in that situation.
Well, if you're looking at replanting because of plant stand, really kind of a key number, especially this late, 70,000 plants or more, we're not going to touch it in pretty much a given year. And if we're talking as low as even 50 or 60,000 at this date, and if you're thinking of the northern part of the territory, I probably still wouldn't even touch that because we're gaining more with overall growth and development and branching. So it's going to look awfully poor, but I think you're going to gain more with what's already there, even though it's quite low.
Okay. Michael, I guess I have a question that I know will be on the minds of some of our educators and others, and that has to do with cover crops. We're going to hear from Eileen here in a little bit about the potential with cover crops, and run us through the scenario there with the insurance.
Yeah, if you're flooded out or you're in a situation where there's no stand and often you're not going to want it just bare ground between now and harvest, and so certainly planting cover crops is an option there. You do have to keep in mind, however, according to the USDA RMA crop insurance rules, that if you do plant that cover crop, you cannot harvest that crop until after November 1. And so that's a very important consideration. If somebody thinks they're going to plant cover crops and graze it or harvest it, that's not going to be an option until after November 1. And so we do have that clause that we have to think about with respect to cover crops.
But it could become a good option if we get past the time for soybean planting, and instead of leaving it.
Yeah,
just
definitely.
blank.
Leaving bare ground is always something you don't want to do, and so certainly it could be an option.
Right. Okay. Do we have any questions from our audience?
I'll just start with Ken. El Nino, we were promised El Nino was going to give us a cool summer anyway. Is El Nino doing this to us?
I think El Nino is a player in this summer season. El Nino is sort of the, you might call it the flip side of La Nina, and we know that La Nina summers, we're very well acquainted with that. 2012, we had a drought. I mean, that was very La Nina associated. And in the flip side, El Nino, we do have these wetter summers at times. And the Temperature maybe not so clear what happens with El Nino. El Nino is basically forms during the winter months. It's more or less very noticeable in winter. It's a winter phenomenon more so than it is a summer phenomenon. And so the temperature effects probably are not quite as defined as the precipitation. So I would say yes, El Nino is playing some part in this, and I think how much is hard to say, and the reason is because the atmosphere is so complicated. That's why forecasters have so much trouble forecasting even a week in advance and things like that. There's so many things going on at once to keep track of, and it's hard to partition, like this is due to El Nino, this is due to that, and due to that is something due to something else. But we're fairly certain that El Nino is playing a part. It's just really hard to put a fraction or a number on it. So I would say yes.
Greg, following up a little bit on that, a couple of my colleagues, David Widmar and Brent Gloy, have actually done some analysis on the impact of crop yields of El Nino years, and so that piece is available to look historically what's happened to crop years when we have years like that.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? I guess I have one more for Ken, and that has to do you have any idea or anything down the road when this may quit?
That's long-range forecasting, and that we depend on models for that primarily, and not even models that we run in my office, but models that are run at the federal level, because the models are very complex. They require supercomputers, they require complex analysis, and it's something that an office like mine just would not be doing every day. And there is a government agency, the Climate Prediction Center, that is responsible for doing that. And based on what they offer us, their outlooks are pretty much what I've said, is that they're going for this cooler period and this wetter period going out at least through July. When you get very much past about 1 month, especially for Indiana and the Midwest area, they tend to have what they call EC, which is equal chances, which means that it could be above, it could be normal, it could be below normal, and it's not real clear. Especially for rainfall, because rainfall is one of the more difficult things to predict so far in advance. It really depends on where our weather system's set up. Where are the high pressure centers located? Where are the low pressure centers? Where is the jet stream? Those are all important considerations to finally determine what our rainfall and temperature pattern is going to be. And so it's really difficult to have an answer to that question very far out in the future. I would say, you know, maybe we're pretty confident when we get out to like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but once you get past a month, it becomes very uncertain. So